if you don't want to be seen on a recording, then you can just stop your video, and then you won't be seen. This is tonight. We're going to be doing it's going to be a lot of talking tonight and a lot of presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to just. I'm just going to go ahead and mute all of you right now, and because
Lisa, you muted yourself. You muted everybody.
You're still muted. You're still muted.
I'm sorry. Am I? Now, can you hear me?
Much better.
But you couldn't hear it all before?
Could you hear me when we were just like? Okay. I'm so sorry. We have a setup here because we have a feedback loop if I'm unmuted, and it worked last night. At least I think it did. Nobody told me they couldn't hear me talk. Could you hear me talk before I started? When we were just like chatting amongst ourselves?
Yeah.
Yes.
The last thing we heard you say is you're going to mute everybody, and then you muted yourself along with everybody, and that's when we kind of had silence. So
okay, I did that. So if you guys could go ahead.
You have to unmute George.
Can't hear me.
How did you get muted again?
I just muted myself.
Oh, that's weird. You should be coming through the mixer. I don't know why you're not coming through. Well, I'm doing most of the talking, so maybe we'll just go with that. Maybe go ahead and mute yourself again, or you are muted.
I just muted. So why don't you ask them to introduce themselves,
okay,
and say their name and where they're from,
okay,
and what city they're from.
Sorry for the technical problems. Okay, so if you'd maybe start, maybe Tom, introduce yourself and what city you're from.
I'm Tom Kiekefer. I am in Coon Rapids, Minnesota. I am the campaign manager for Jason Ruffalo's campaign for the Minnesota House in 35B.
And Kayla?
I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I'm recently retired.
And Christy?
I'm Christy Erickson. I'm in Cambridge, Minnesota, just here to find out what this drop roll thing is. So,
Okay.
but yeah, I don't know if I'm retired yet or not. It depends upon what happens with the pandemic.
Yeah, I'm sure. Craig?
I'm a Minnesota guy who retired over here on the Mississippi River in Wisconsin about 12 years ago. And I got interested in politics because you can guess why.
Yeah.
I'm involved in, there's 3 counties here who are in an legislative district, and we need to flip it. And so we're trying to get the votes to come out and flip our district.
Okay. Ron?
Thank you, George. I'm working from Southeast Minneapolis. I'm working with a group doing Biden small business issues and a plan. I'm helping my friend Quinn Nystrom in the 8th Congressional District win back the 8th, and helping several Senate candidates to help us take back the Senate.
Suzanne? Unmute.
Sure.
Hey.
I'm here in Alexandria, Minnesota, and I'm working with Carol Wenner's campaign, who's trying to unseat Mary Franzen.
Okay, there we go.
Colin Peterson tells us here in Douglas County, we're the worst part of CD7.
Oh, never nice to hear. Well, you have John Cole there. He's a great guy. So,
Oh,
John Cole, up in the Alex area. He's another activist there.
Oh, okay.
Diane. Oh, unmute, sorry.
Yeah, I did it. I tried before and I couldn't. I'm from Pepin, Wisconsin, with Pepin County Democrats.
Cool. Land of apples. Lori? Oh,
We are Lori and John Walters. We live in Fertile, Minnesota. We're new to the Polk County DFL organization, so we're just here to learn.
great. Jason?
Hi, Jason Ruffalo. I'm in Andover running in District 35B for House against Peggy Scott, who's been doing this way too long and not nearly trying hard enough. Our district's luckily bent from red to purple through a lot of elbow grease over the last couple of years. So I'm really trying to pick that torch up and keep running with it.
Doug?
Doug Olznak, St. Louis Park, Minnesota, concerned citizen.
All right. And Doug, just a quick question. If you're on the phone, so you won't have, I'm not sure if you'll see the screens or not, but maybe you will.
No, I should. I've done a lot of Zoom stuff, and yep, I just do this so I can wear my earpods or whatever instead of the computer audio, but I
Cool.
can mute myself and unmute, I think, so I'll
All
try
right.
to be not problematic.
Okay. John?
So John Siegmeyer, thanks for doing this. I'm out in Washington County, Minnesota by Stillwater, helping to re-elect Representative Christensen and replace, well, work for Josiah Hill on the Senate seat. Turn this blue. Thank you.
Thank you. Kay? Kay, are you there? Well, how about Ellie?
Okay, let's try this.
Oh, there she is. Okay.
I don't know if you can see me.
No,
We cannot.
Huh.
we can hear you. Oh, I can't. They can't hear me, so.
And now you're muted again, Kay. I don't know what happened there. Let's go to Ellie. Ellie, can you hear us?
Yes. Hi. Are we just introducing ourselves and telling where we're from?
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm Ellie Zaragoza from Mankato, which is in the 1st Congressional District, and I'm with the Blue Earth County DFL and SD19 DFL.
Great. And Kay, I
Okay.
don't know if you're back on. Go ahead.
I'm Kay Slama. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
I'm between New London and Spicer. That's between Wilmer and St. Cloud. I'm with the Climate Action Group in the area. I'm with the UU Church. I'm with the League of Women Voters. I'm just listening to find out what your process is.
Okay. I think that's everybody. So, okay. Well, and Lisa's introduced herself, so maybe I'll introduce myself. And I've been active in the DFL for quite a while. Here in Minnesota, the Democratic Party is the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. So we're called the DFL. But you'll hear that, and that's what we mean by that. Been active here, been a CD chair, been CD vice chair for much longer than chair, and also involved in it. I don't know how many campaigns doing this and that. I formed Al Franken's campaign band when he ran, and he's a Grateful Dead freak, so that was kind of wild. And other than that, I've been state executive committee, state central committee, and pretty active in CD3 here in Minnesota. And also, in terms of what we'll be talking about tonight, I have some experience in psychology and also in television, hence the cameras you might see back there. And I've got all sorts of television crap around here, but I've been involved in television production and television systems and pretty much all sides of it except on camera, which I didn't want to do because I don't want to scare children. So there's that. Otherwise, in terms of psychology, I worked for a little while in college doing research. And let me share my screen here. And this what we'll do here is I'll be sharing the screen, and a lot of tonight's presentation is the screen time. But please, if you have a question, ask it. I think Lisa said if you don't want to be recorded, you turn off your camera and mute, and then you can ask questions in the chat room. So, and let me share my screen here. Okay. So we are Connections Lab. Not a bad idea to mention that. And then I'm getting my little clicker here going. I can advance slides. I worked a long time ago in graduate school at University of Nevada at Reno, and we were teaching sign language to chimpanzees on the first project to do that. This was quite a while ago, as you can imagine. Oddly enough, some of you may know Karen Wills here in Minnesota, and we just found out a couple of years ago that we both worked on the same project, just missed each other by a year. But we were teaching sign language basically to learn how people communicate, or how communication happens and how learning happens. So it was very interesting. It was experimental psychology, not clinical. So we found it very, very interesting. And I've had a lifelong interest in psychology and have kept up with it. And especially in recent years, Lakoff back in 2004 got me going. And since then, been getting steeped in it. And Lakoff is an advisor for us and has looked at this workshop we'll be doing. And so he's been helpful with that. So, okay, let me, oh, sorry. What I'll say is what we're going to explore today is the technology. So if technology is the application of science to the real world, if that's a definition you buy, then what we have here is we're going to apply the science, cognitive science, social science, linguistics, behavioral economics, which has been very informative in past decade. We're applying all of that to real world situations of voter contact. And some of our opponents, or I should say our opponents, because the Republican Party and the conservatives have in general have used this very same knowledge. We can use this knowledge, I think, with honesty and integrity. It's frankly probably a lot easier to use it if you don't worry about those things, but I think we can do that. And so I encourage you as we go through this to think about that, on how we can use these principles without compromising our own integrity, without trying to fool anyone. So we need to change the way we communicate. We don't apply the psychology as we should. So I noticed something about it, and all of you have done this. You've been out doing voter contact. And what happens when you arrive at the door, and if I arrived at that door, I don't know if I would knock on it, but both the volunteer and the voter are scared. And, you know, the voter looks and sees you coming up the driveway, you've got a clipboard, you've got buttons on, you've got a campaign shirt, and they're going, oh, it's a political person. They must know everything about every issue. I'm going to look like an idiot. And then you're walking up to the door going, you know, they gave me this crappy script, and I'm afraid the voter's going to ask me a question. I won't know what to say. So everybody's scared. And it all comes down to the fact that we're worried that we won't know the ins and outs of all of the policy issues. There is a way to communicate that takes the fear out of it for both the voter contact person and for the voter. And that's really, at the end of this workshop, you'll see that this is a skill, but if you practice the skill and learn it, it gets a whole lot easier to have that conversation, and you can have a conversation about something everybody can talk about. The reason we have to change the way we communicate is that the conservatives are basically cleaning our clock on this. They've been at this for 4 decades. It's been heavily funded, very well supported, and that is still going on. It's also become part of their culture and what they do because they know it works. So it's like we're playing baseball on the conservatives' home field all the time, and we have to not let them have the home field advantage. We got to take that back. Our current messages don't always work. And one of the reasons is that conservatives know 4 things that we don't always think about. One is that people don't think like we think they think. We think people are rational, logical. If we just give them the facts, they'll reason to the same conclusion that we have. That isn't actually the way things work. It can work that way, but most often it doesn't. Facts and logic are less effective than values and emotions. So the conservatives know that, and most of their messaging can be very emotional. They're looking for an emotional trigger in it. They're also not afraid to tell people who they are. They make no apologies for who they are, even though they probably should. And then framing and messaging is strategic. And Democrats in general are tactical. So from election to election, we worry about that election. What messages can we make for this election? How are we going to say it this time? And then the next time around, we go through the whole thing again. Whereas the conservatives basically have their messaging pretty well figured out. They've had it figured out for most of that 40 years, and they just keep repeating the same stuff over and over again. And people believe them. If you ask people what a conservative is, they'll tell you, low taxes and government out of my life. And we all know that because we've heard it a million times. Ask people what a liberal is, and I think all of us would struggle a little bit to come up with something. And if we did, we'd probably all come up with different things. So it's just kind of a quick overview on that. And I would say also that I like this quote from Harry Truman, because this is kind of what we've been doing in the so-called moving to the right to win. And I do understand the need in a red district to appeal to as many voters as possible. I'm not naive about that. I would put it to you that if we had our messaging act together, we wouldn't feel that pull. And Harry Truman, this isn't anything new. Harry Truman, this was happening back in his time, and he said giving people a choice between someone who acts like a Republican and a real Republican, voters will pick the real one every time. And I think some version of that has happened to us, or we've done it to ourselves. So go ahead and give it a shot.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, good.
You guys can hear me now? Oh, good. Okay. So tonight, well, the goal for the whole entire 4 weeks is that we're going to, you need to forward it, that we're going to learn the skill of framing, and we're going to unlearn some bad habits that we have, and learn a culture of effective communication and make our worldview dominant again. So if you want to flip it again, George, to the agenda. So the agenda is tonight for session 1, we're going to talk about the science of framing. And then next Tuesday, we're going to talk about worldviews, and we'll have some exercises to do. And then in the third session, we're going to talk about stop, drop, and roll, which is the technique that Connections Lab has developed to create effective messages. And then our fourth session, we're going to actually work on some issues and develop some messages. And I think this will be good, because one of the things that people have told us in our in-person workshops is we always run out of time. And when we get to this part where we actually start putting some messages together, we kind of like we just run out of time. And so we're hoping by giving a whole hour to just doing this, then people will be able to walk away feeling that they know how to use this method and that they have some messages developed.
Okay, so are there any questions about what we just talked about? Okay, good. Okay, then we're going to explore a little bit of the science. I'm not going to go super deep into this, but I think you'll get a good feel for what is happening and for how it applies to what we're talking about. So as we mentioned before, people don't think like we think they think. And again, we have a tendency to think that when somebody tells us something or we hear something of a political nature, our first thing is to go to what the facts are and what the logic is to those facts. And that sounds like a very logical thing to do, is to say, here's how I reason to this conclusion. So here's all my data, and I can't see how you couldn't possibly come to the same conclusion that I have. And it's that, like I say, that can work. There are people who are trained in formal logic, scientists, logicians, others. But most people, it's not that they can't do it. It's just a default of most humans, including me, is that we don't always go to logic and reason first. So, and there are good reasons for this. Going real deep in on this, ideas are physical. I mean that literally. Everything you know, all the people you've met, all the experiences you've had, the songs you remember, how to ride a bike, your skills, all of those things live inside those things up there. I can't use my pointer, but inside those brain cells. And so, and the brain cells will work as clusters and basically form a neural network. So if you have an idea like dog, that idea is connected to maybe a larger understanding you have of something called an animal. And so all these things are connected together. So if you light up one set of neurons that talk about one idea, likely it's going to connect to other sets of neurons with ideas. And we will see how that happens, because as we grow, that's how our brains develop. This guy he's learning right now, and he seems to be really happy about it. My friend Antonia Scatton says our sense of right and wrong is established early in childhood. These values systems physically exist in our brains in the form of neural networks. And this is that. So when we say ideas are physical, I really mean it, which means we have to know how brains really work. That's a hard thing to do for everybody, psychologists included, but we have found some things out. So let me give you a quick, make sure I got the right slide here. Okay. So how are frames formed? And this is a very simplified drawing of a very simplified human being here, but you can see that Homer has frames for things that are important to him. And those just pop right up for him very quickly. And he will see the world in terms of his most dominant frames. And so our job is to rewire the connections between the frames that people have. And we'll talk about that. One thing that strengthens frames is repetition, just saying things over and over. You see this a lot on the current crop of Republicans in Congress and the president. It doesn't matter whether what they've said has already been proven false 1,000 times, where they have their own specialized Snopes article on what they've say. They just keep repeating it. And if you do that, it gets into people's brains and they think about it, sometimes without us even noticing. An example is they started using tax relief a long time ago and nobody really caught on. And you hear Democrats talk about tax relief. And the problem with that is that frame was consciously engineered to pay taxes as a burden that need relieving. There's a whole story there. We'll get to that. So by continuing to repeat it, other people pick it up, including us. We repeat their messages quite a bit, and we don't want to do that. For example, you'll hear conservatives say they want to take our guns away, and we say, we don't want to take your guns away. Well, we just repeated what they said. And neurologically, as silly as it sounds, the fact that we repeated that and that we repeat that often when they say that just puts take our guns away as a concept. It builds that stronger in the brain. Literally, the connections between the brain cells get stronger over repetition. Whether you agree with it or not, that still is going to become a well-known frame in your head. You can resist it, but it's not always easy. Okay, here's a little test here. Does anybody know what that thing is on the screen?
Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Somebody does. I'm not going to make you look silly. All right, I'll answer it. I know what you were all thinking. That's a guitar. And you'd be right. Now, are there any guitar players at all or musicians here? Maybe I need a different example. We usually have one. If you're a musician, you know that particular guitar, you have a different experience because you know looking at that guitar going, boy, that's a Gibson Les Paul. That is a famous rock guitar. It's been used by all the greats. It's still in use today. It's probably one of the most popular guitars used in music and recording because it just has a very unique sound. And if you're a really into it musician, you'll also notice that it happens to be a left-handed guitar. The pick guard is on the wrong side because if you're left-handed, you'd be strumming downwards and hitting that pick guard, the white triangle thing. So your experience as a guitar player or as a musician is very different than the experience that other people have who don't play music and don't know what that guitar is. So you're having a qualitatively different experience. If you were a vintage guitar collector, this here would be a really different experience, especially if you found it at a garage sale for $10, because that is a rare 1959 Gibson Les Paul guitar worth $194,000. And you can bet that that person's experience is going to be very different than everyone else's, because their experience, what they've learned as they've grown, what they've been into, the interests they have, all change the experience and the perception that they have when they see that object. So 2 or 3 or 4 people can look at the same object and have 2 or 3 or 4 completely different experiences. Something we don't always think about, but that's the reality, and that's what brain science tells us. Does all that make sense? Are there any questions up to this point on that? Okay, frames are stories. This is you'll hear us say framing and frames are this and that, but this is a great way to think about frames, is that they're stories. It's not something as simple as just a guitar. It is a guitar with some kind of meaning, less or more, depending on who you are and your experiences. So let's take a quick look here. In a story, you have actors and roles. There's people and they're doing things, right? If you're in a hospital, a doctor's the person who operates, or a surgeon's person who operates, not the ambulance driver. And there are scenes. Things that happen in a hospital is the scene, maybe the operating room, other things belong there. Whereas like maybe a handball court does not belong in a hospital. And then there are scenarios, and scenarios just means that in that scene with those actors, there are certain things that are likely to happen, other things that are unlikely to happen. The doctor's probably not going to go pole vaulting through the atrium of the hospital. So the frames will constrain the story. If you have a good frame, that frame will tell a story, and within that story, only certain things can happen. So let's take a look at an example of that. When today's current crop of Republicans, and I say this because, as you all know, there have been a number of Republicans of conscience who've walked away from the party, and some are even prominent Republicans are pushing for people to vote for Joe Biden. So I want to be careful in this, but the standard Republican idea of immigration is a crime story. So in a crime story about immigration, the people coming across the border are criminals, plain and simple. They've broken the law. The people who are the victims of that are Americans who now have criminals, and if you believe the president, rapists and murderers and gang members and any manner of nasty person. And the heroes in this story are the Republicans who are going to keep them out by building a wall, which is the simple way to do it. People are coming in, build a wall. Okay. And that's the story. And the other villain in this, besides the criminals themselves, are the Democrats who want to help out these people at the border. So we're also the criminals. So you have this victim, villain, hero story. This is a common story that you hear in political messaging. And I think this we can use this too. Again, we have to be honest about it, and we don't use it just to scare people. Let's take a look at an alternative way of looking at this. And some of you know Julie Ethan, who came to Michigan with me, so Michigan people may know her, and then have been at some of these workshops around, and Julie worked this up. But her experience, this is kind of what changed her mind and turned her from being a conservative to a liberal. This was a catalyst that got that moving. Change the frame and look at refugees, or look at immigrants as refugees. That's a very different story. In the refugee story, the people in in Central America and Mexico and South America, what does it take for them to grab the kids by the hand, leave their home, their extended family, their church, which is very big, the community, their jobs, perhaps even a business. They leave all that behind, grab the kids, walk 1,500 miles to a border and try to make a dangerous border crossing, which they know they may or may not make. And then when they get there, it's very possible to get picked up by Border Patrol and either thrown back across the border if they're lucky, or their children will be taken from them, put in cages, and their parents may never see them again. What does it take to have somebody do that? What's going on back where they live that causes this to happen? There's grinding poverty. Their children are being kidnapped and sold into the sex trade, and the poverty is so bad there, and the drug wars are so bad that they're literally in fear of their lives, either from starvation or from violence. And so that's a very different story. That immigrant is a victim. The refugee is exactly what they are. Refugees deserve empathy. In this story, we feel they deserve empathy because we have that as a core value. I would extend that empathy out a little farther and say that it's love in the agape term, in the idea that our party basically sees other people as, whoever they are, as valuable, as having inherent worth. And so we apply that love for fellow humans. And the victim, of course, is the refugee. The heroes in this story are us. The villains in this story are the people who lock the children up and send the parents away, never to be seen again, and all the rest that goes on. And so we talk about it in that frame, and we stay in that frame, and we don't talk about the other frame. That's how frames can be like stories. And you can see that telling a different story constrains what it is you're going to talk about, or the conversation is going to be out. It puts boundaries around it. And you're very rarely up against your opponent directly you're not on CNN every day. So you may have occasion where your opponent's going to talk about it as a crime. You're under no obligation to talk within the crime frame. None at all. Move on and talk about the refugee frame. And another one might be here, opportunity that our country has been open to immigrants. Immigrants have made this country strong, and right now we need them because we need more people. So are there questions on that? Sometimes that one's tricky. Oh, we have a cat. Okay, I'm just I'm blowing through here. Stop me at any point if you need to. It's very important to change the frame. And you can see here, we need to build a foundation of frames in people's heads. So I have a red brain and a blue brain here. And I don't see the political spectrum as a spectrum. I don't see it as a linear continuum. To me, it's Venn diagrams. And we'll get into that more later when we talk about biconceptualism. But our job is to turn the situation around. Conservative frames now dominate the political narrative, so much so that we don't even notice, and some of our elected officials don't even notice when we're using them. So we have to go about talking about our frames all the time, more than we do, 95% of the time. And I know, because I fall to it too, I see something stupid Trump does on TV, and the first thing I want to do is go on Facebook, say, look how stupid Trump was. And I just went ahead and pushed that image out to more people, when the better thing is to not do that and talk about the issue at hand. So what is framing? Okay, and framing is basically the act of using frames and those stories that the frames contain to get our message across. And that is, and in this case, our mission is to widen the pathways to the liberal worldview by just talking about our values and things we care about more than we talk about how bad the other side is. And then if we do that and we start winning and widen those real physical neural pathways to our ideas, because we repeat it and because we talk about it in value terms that people can understand, then what happens is the conservative worldview, the paths to those ideas will get less strong. They actually will weaken in the brain. And we've seen this happen, I think, in most obviously in the LGBTQ movement, and the total switch around from people thinking it was a sin to, gee, why can't people love each other? And it's because they kept at it, and that's what they talked about. And that's what everybody talked about who wanted to see the marriage amendment defeated in Minnesota, and then turning around and having legislation make gay marriage legal. So that is a good example of that. So you may be wondering, what is a message? And people, this gets confused quite a bit. Framing and messaging are not exactly the same thing. Framing is the art and the science of, as a friend of mine, Steve Booker, says, convincing people that they already agree with you. And that has some insight, and you'll see why, especially in the worldview section. But messaging is whatever comes out of your mouth. So whatever you say is a message. It's carrying meaning to the other person, even if it's not anything about politics. Whatever you say, that's a message. It's simply the act of speaking. A good message reinforces our frames, reinforces our values, and talks about the things we care about when we talk about issues. So the only question about messages is will they light up the frames in your listeners' brains that we want to light up? And will they work for us or against us? And so that's framing in a nutshell. And I'm sure there have to be a few questions. And so.
Questions or comments?
Or comments. Yeah.
I think sometimes in the past, the Democrats have imitated the Republicans in their framing in ways that was unhelpful. For example, when John Kerry was running for president, he accepted the terms pro-life and pro-choice, and really he was both. He was not for abortion, but he would not have made it illegal. But he did not clarify his position from Bush, and so he lost. And if we accept their terms and using their definitions of their terms, that can be a problem too.
Yep. Another example might be in climate science, where, and this is a slightly different take on it, but when Bill Nye gets up and debates climate crisis deniers, he elevates their frame. He's making the other case, but by doing so in that forum, he gives a forum for those ideas to get out. That's not exactly related, but.
And two other terms that depends upon which side you're on is terrorist and rebel,
Well, war on terror was.
And war on terror, that came out of developing the word terrorist.
Yeah. Yeah, it was consciously engineered. It wasn't a war on bin Laden. It wasn't a war on Afghanistan or Iraq or even Al Qaeda. It was the war on terror, which then makes it this big thing that's out there and non-specific, meaning they can do pretty much go wherever they want to fight it, which is what happened. And
it also increases people's fear because they're using the word terror.
Yes. And so how many Democrats have used the word war on terror back at that time? A lot of them. And so one of the things about learning this is that, after this, I think you'll find that you'll be more able to spot when this is going on. You'll be more attuned to be looking for it and noticing it. And we will say more than once, we recommend, getting a stiff drink and sitting down and watching Fox News for 15 minutes so that you can hear what is being said by the other side, and try to notice what the frames are and try to notice what's happening.
Well, and one thing maybe that if I can just jump on that, George, really quickly, is that I know we're talking about framing, we're talking about emotion versus facts. I'm an engineer, so of course my instinct is to spit out a bunch of charts, which is exactly antithetical to everything you're teaching. And I understand that. But within that, when we talk about framing, I feel like my message would be one of hope if we're trying to talk about emotions, whereas the Republicans kind of work off of fear. And fear is much easier to trigger. It hits that reptilian piece of your brain. Is there any, I mean, I don't want to run a fear-based campaign, but that seems to be the easiest way to get a message across. If you're working on an emotional level, fear is the easiest trigger to hit. Is there a disadvantage to running a hope-based or a happy, like when we talk about framing, are there emotions we need to focus on when we're doing that?
That's an excellent question. And it's kind of like some people are very drawn to horror movies and fear, and other people really respond well to romances or happy stories. And fear is very visceral, and people will respond. One of the first things that happens when you feel fear is you lose the ability, your ability to reason becomes compromised. It's not as good. So that's one of the reasons they use it. And you and I've talked about this before, Jason. I like to avoid using fear. However, if there's a fear that's a real, if there's a real issue out there, you can't avoid talking about it. For example, Tom emailed me today, and is it all right, Tom, if I share a little bit about what we were talking about, your email?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
If
we
I
were
think
talking.
other people can learn from it.
Yeah, we were talking about the opponent, Peggy Scott, Jason's opponent, and Tom is Jason's campaign manager, voted down a bonding bill which included $16 million to go to Anoka County for the community, for the college, Anoka Hennepin Community College, in business and in health, right? And
Nursing.
Nursing, yeah. And so there's a way to portray that. I mean, and Tom and I were working on this and saying that, well, this is a loss for the county, for the citizens of the county, and for the students. This is something that will compromise their ability to be successful in the world. And now that, if you're a parent, probably scares you, but it's a very truthful statement, and we're not overtly trying to fool people with fears that aren't real, and we're not trying to make them afraid, but we're telling them this. And if losing that money is bad for their kids and they are a little afraid of it, that's not so bad. You got to be careful with the fear frame. I think what you see on the right is that they go to it most of the time, but I think you can also tell a story of empathy. So if you tell a story regarding healthcare, I've used this example before, where because rural clinics have been closing around the country, people now, you can talk about, maybe you have an aunt in Eau Claire, and she now has to drive 400 miles to get dialysis. I'm just making this up, but people have had to do this now to get any kind of medical care. And if you tell that story, and again, as we've talked about with Tom and Jason, those stories have to be stories that you've heard directly from the person who experienced, or even better, a story you experienced yourself. No third-hand stories, like my brother's second cousin said this happened to him. If you didn't hear it from somebody who was involved in the story, don't retell it, unless it's like a famous person and it's in the news. George Floyd, you can talk about George Floyd. And then tell a story of hope. Wouldn't it be great if people anywhere didn't have to worry about whether they were going to get health care? My poor aunt has to drive, or aunt, I'm from New York, your aunt has to drive 400 miles for this. That really makes me very sad. And I think we have candidates who are going to try to work to make sure that that's something that doesn't happen anymore, and that people are going to be able to get the health care they need, and they'll be healthier, happier, more able to go out and be successful in the world. I think telling that kind of story is, if you can find one of those and not use fear, I think you're probably better off. And think about what the other frames that are popping up. Yes.
Okay, Ron, it looks like Ron has a question, and I think Craig had his hand up. So first
Oh, okay.
Ron and then Craig.
And then Tom after that. Okay. Ron?
Thank you. I have a very subtle example of messaging. George, I think you know that I was a big anti-war organizer back in the late 60s, early 70s with the Vietnam War. And we used to have between 200 and 250,000 people in Golden Gate Park every other Saturday for how long? 3.5 years.
Wow.
It wasn't a Black Lives Matter, you're in and out in 2 or 3 months, and then we're bored or we're tired or we're getting rained on. 3.5 years. Having said that, some people were talking with us about communicating. It was really messaging, George, but we didn't think in those terms back then. But I just wrote down something that I do remember, that we were organizers, not everybody was, but the massive people who showed up were protesters as opposed to demonstrators. And gee, what's the difference? Maybe not much, but the people who were mentoring us thought protester or protesting was very different, positive, understandable. At least it wasn't violent. It wasn't, nobody got their feathers ruffled, as opposed to demonstrator or demonstrate. They had more of a negative feeling. Anyway, I'll leave it there, but I remember that as being a very subtle difference that we were taught back then, which made a lot of difference at the time.
Isn't it amazing that just a tweak here and there, or just changing to a similar word is better? And as you get to learn this more, you'll see, you'll notice words a lot more and think about what do those words that I'm using mean? What kind of baggage might they, I think of words as kind of like cars with a trailer on the back with all your baggage on it. Not that it's all negative, some of that's good stuff, but what is all of that that's there?
Okay, so Craig, did you have a question, Craig, or a comment?
Well, I didn't, but then when you mentioned my name, I
thought I saw your hand go up. I'm sorry.
I wanted to mention that I got very interested in the redistricting issue, especially when I learned what happened in Michigan, and the language of the word gerrymandering and the phrase fair maps, I think, is an example of a more liberal approach, use of language that is taking off, and we get to own that, and it's resulting in Wisconsin of a 70 to 80% demonstrated support for changing the districting. So it's an example of a positive way that we've actually learned to do this.
That's a great example. I love that, because gerrymandering is something that you don't want to happen. That's what you're talking about, something you don't want to happen, rather than in this case. And what was the term again?
Redistricting, I think.
Fair maps.
Fair maps.
Oh, fair maps.
Fair maps.
Okay.
Says exactly
great.
what it is that
Yeah.
you want done. It's descriptive, and it has the word fair, which is a value. And it, all in 2 words, you've described what the solution you want and why that solution is a good solution. That's wonderful. In fact,
That's
there.
actually a great.
Yeah.
I've got one too. I've got an idea. Sue has an idea.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Okay, right around here, because of mining and not mining in northeastern Minnesota, we go around and round about protections versus regulations.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Much better to do that. Regulations are, here's what you shouldn't do. And protections are, here's what we're going to do to make sure everybody is okay. And it's that's another great example. I think, Tom, you had something to say too?
Yeah, thanks, George. I was just going to make the comment, when you use the idea of healthcare and driving, 400 miles for dialysis. I think when the candidate makes the promise that they're going to work to improve that, doesn't lay a framework that says, I'm going to do this and this and this in the next 3 years or 4 years, and it doesn't set them up then for failure when it comes to the next election.
Well, and then think about what we said before, and we'll get more into this in the next one, but the concept of values and these positive messages that we're saying here. This is an easier conversation to have with a voter. Basically, all politics is moral. It's all about right and wrong. And if you're talking about the things that you're going to do that are right, you don't have to go in very deeply into policy. That puts you and the voter at ease, because the voter isn't going to, you'll find very well educated or very well read voters, but you'll also find regular old people living their lives, raising kids, going to work, and when I had kids, I didn't have a whole lot of time to think about anything. And I should say when we had kids, actually, Lisa.
And when they were little, we
When they
still
were
have
little.
kids.
Yeah, that's true.
They're just older now.
That's right, we still have them. We haven't gotten rid of them yet. But that's a conversation everybody can have. People want to know why you believe what you believe. They want to connect with you on that values level to see if they overlap. And as we'll see in the next one, the values that we have as liberals and the values conservatives have are values actually that we all share, but we don't apply the same ones to politics. And so we'll see that. But that's why if you go to values, we keep building that. Every time you say a message about healthcare or about air and water, and you use the protection frame in two very different issues, and you keep using protection frame in other issues, what you're doing is not only getting your message across on your issue, you've built that idea of protection as a value into those messages. And we're not only strengthening that issue's message, we're strengthening that value over and over the more it gets heard. And with exact words or with a story that evokes that value. Doug, did you have a question? You unmuted.
I do.
Go for it, man.
I did, yep. So just a question. The difference between the example that was cited a few minutes ago, which was, fair, the use of the word fair versus the use of the word protection. Even though, whatever, I'm a liberal, I protections are great, but don't you think the people we're trying to message to think that protection, there's a pretty fair amount of them that will say protection equals restriction versus fair mining? Because who disagrees with fair, right? Fair is just a much more powerful word versus protection. Say, well, I'm not sure what the mining example was, but if we said fair mining, fair, yeah, fair. Oh, you're not against mining. Protection, though, is restriction. So I would be careful. Just when I hear it. So my comment.
Yep, I hear you. Well, and the other thing is you don't always have to use the word protection if the message you're sending evokes that feeling in people, evokes that value in people. So you can.
Correct, yep.
And that's some of the subtleties of using framing and watching. It's very possible that the word protection to many people is going to be synonymous with restriction. Certainly if they're on the right, they may think that. But there are a lot of people in the middle. And the other thing is that even people on the right understand a protection frame. It's in our society. It's part of everyday life. They want to protect themselves. They put on their seatbelts, whatever. So they understand the value. So what we're trying to do is shift the issues over to being seen in a new frame of reference, literally, and have them think about it differently. And if you subtly evoke those emotions and those values, then you're a real skilled framer. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Going off mute, yeah, that's fantastic. I think it's a great thing to discuss.
Okay, yeah, it's you can see that this gets that it is a skill and it's something you have to practice. I know we've been I'm consulting with Jason and we've had some long talks, and I know you and Tom caught me. It happens. It's a skill, and you got to just think about it. That's why it's important to watch Fox News from time to time. That's why it's important to just listen to people and think about it. Maybe we, at some point in this, we'll throw up another video that we've got that shows Nancy Pelosi doing this really well. Or you can go onto the website at connectionslab.org. That's probably the better way to do it. And there's a menu item at the top, says audio video webinars. And if you go to that page, there's a Nancy Pelosi video. It's about 3 minutes long. And you'll see somebody who has been framing and messaging her entire life and is just expert at it in so many different ways. And while you're watching the video, I have in a sidebar, it says what it is she's doing at each moment in the video. And it's so many of the things that you heard tonight, but we'll also hear in the coming sessions, and plus more advanced things. And so I encourage you to take a look at that.
Okay, it's a little past 8. So these seminars these sessions are 1 hour long, so it is a little past 8 o'clock right now. And I know somebody's already had to jump off. So what we're going to do is we've already sent you a sheet that you can look at and think about an issue or multiple issues over the next week that you have a concern about, and may have some ideas about how your issue can be solved, whether it's through, like, if there's well, right now we're not in, we don't have any state sessions going on or anything, but if there's like a solution to that, and then kind of come up with a message. So we're just going to have a starting point with that. And then next week, then look to, before our meeting next week, we're going to send you another set of worksheets that we will use during the session next time on worldviews. So we'll be using that next set of sheets that we send you during the session next week.
And to be clear, the one we sent you today has 2 pages. Do the first page, which says your issue, and then just forget about the second page for now. Or look at it. That's okay too, but the first page is what we need. And before anybody else leaves, I have to say thank you. I really appreciate it, everybody coming, and that we've had people from at least 3 states, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
Please feel free to tell others about this. We are in part funded by the Minnesota Democratic Party, but also by some people who've donated. And we're waiting on Doug's $2 million. And and at that point, we should be able to do so much more. But otherwise, this is offered for free around the United States. Other state parties are aware that these are going on. We're trying to get it ramped up in other states. So please share it, no charge. Come on and learn stuff. Now, for this one here, it might be tricky for them to join, after the first one. When these 4 sessions are done, we'll roll it over and start again the 4 weeks after this. So if somebody misses it and they want to start now, they can come back and do the frames thing later. And that's not ideal, but it's okay. Or they can just start then. Anything else? I don't want to keep everybody here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are the Monday evenings recommended before the Tuesdays?
No, actually, if in a perfect world, the Tuesdays would be first. The reason we did it this way was because a lot of the people most of the people on the mailing list have already taken in fact, some people who were here today have taken it. And so they know,
taken
this workshop. So we wanted to have something very practical. So this is really focused on the science. And if you haven't had it, this is a great way to understand how this stuff works.
But anybody, you can come in on Monday nights, though. Those are standalone.
Yeah, anybody can come in on that.
Those are just standalone, just on very specific topics.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Really good.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
George. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. All right, guys. We'll see you later.
That went pretty good, but we'll